If you ask most Bleach fans why Gin's plan failed, you'll get the same answer every time. The Hogyoku ended up saving Aizen. While yes, that is technically correct, it's a surface level assessment and it doesn't even begin to explain what actually happened in chapters 414 through to 416. Because Gin Ichimaru orchestrated what is genuinely the closest that anyone within Bleach has ever come to killing Aizen. Nobody, including Urahara, Yamamoto, or even Ichigo in his Bankai form came as close as Gin. The former captain of the 3rd Division ripped a hole through Aizen's chest, tearing the Hogyoku clean out of his body, and for a brief window, Aizen was dead, as we witnessed his cells dissolving and his torso disintegrating. But somehow he had come back. In this video, we'll be explaining what went wrong with Gin's plan. I'll be delving into his 100-year plan, speaking about his Bankai, whose true power was hidden from every living soul within the Soul Society, and we'll be discussing the weakness to Kyoka Suigetsu that only one person in the universe knew about. And lastly, there is a single variable that no amount of planning could have accounted for. So without further delay, let's delve into why Gin's plan failed. Let's first talk about Gin's Zanpakuto Kamishini no Yari. Breaking down every aspect of it, from its deceptive appearance to its hidden poison, it was designed for a single purpose: to kill Aizen. On the surface, Gin initially claimed that his Bankai extended 13 kilometers at 500 times the speed of sound. This feat easily makes it the fastest Zanpakuto in existence. He boasted about its length, speed, and its destructive reach. But all of this was a lie, and he held on to this misdirection for over 100 years. He told Aizen and the Gote 13 and everyone that this is what his Zanpakuto does. But the real power of Kamishini no Yari is that the blade turns to dust for a fraction of a second when it expands and contracts, and embedded within his Zanpakuto is a cellular poison that is able to dissolve Gin's opponent's body from the inside out. When his Zanpakuto pierces his opponent and it retracts, it can leave behind a tiny fragment inside his victim's body. That shard lays dormant until Gin utters the command "kill Kamishini no Yari," at which point the poison activates internally, destroying his opponent at a cellular level, like a snake patiently waiting for its prey as it pounces. When Gin activates his Bankai, his Zanpakuto doesn't change form. It looks identical to his sealed Zanpakuto, so you cannot tell by looking at him whether if he's holding a regular sword or an active Bankai. In terms of concealment, this is an absurd advantage, and Gin fully capitalized upon this on the day that he made his move against Aizen. Gin's Shikai is called Shinzo, which means God Spear. Kamishini no Yari, the Bankai, means God Killing Spear. Kubo is very deliberate with his naming conventions. The fact that his Bankai is called God Killing Spear tells you exactly what this Bankai was built for. Kubo was later asked on his official fan club outside whether if Gin's blade would eventually cease to exist if he kept leaving fragments inside opponents. So imagine if he uses his Bankai for the 100th time. If it continues to leave fragments, you would imagine that his Zanpakuto would shrink in size. But Kubo confirmed that the missing pieces from his Bankai regenerate over time, similar to how a snake replenishes its poison. This is a fascinating detail because the snake motif runs through every fiber of Gin's character, from his appearance to his behavior and even his Zanpakuto. Everything about Gin Ichimaru is the snake, and what do snakes do? They wait in the undergrowth, perfectly still, for however long it takes, as they strike only at the most perfect moment. How does a child from the slums of Rukongai end up spending over 100 years as Aizen's right-hand man, waiting for a single opening? Well, all of this starts with Rangiku Matsumoto. Gin found her collapsed in the outer districts of Rukongai, drained of her spiritual energy. At this time, he offered her dried persimmons. This is a small detail, but this is actually his favorite food, as both Gin and Rangiku started to live together from this moment. Presumably because of the trauma of what she had endured, she had forgotten her own birthday, so Gin told her that the day they met would be her birthday from then on. They were only kids at the time, and this was most likely the only genuine, uncomplicated relationship that Gin had ever had. But then he had seen what Aizen had done to Rangiku. While gathering firewood, Gin stumbled upon 3 Shinigami kneeling before Aizen, handing over a glowing orb to him. This incomplete Hogyoku at the time was being fed with the souls of Rukongai citizens. Gin recognized those Shinigami. They were the same ones that he'd spotted near Rangiku before before he found her drained and unconscious. The Can't Fear Unworld light novels fills out the rest. Aizen wasn't just taking spiritual energy from Rangiku, he was extracting a fragment of the Soul King from her, which is referred to as a nail, as this fragment was intermingled with her Konpaku or her soul. So a literal piece of Rangiku's soul was carved out in order to feed a Hogyoku that Aizen was developing at the time so that he could overthrow the Soul King. The Rebirth of Souls game later clarified the timeline. Gin first saw Aizen's men near Rangiku. He waited until they left, then approached her for the first time. He was already putting pieces together before they ever spoke. From that moment, Gin's entire life became centered around this singular mission. He told Rangiku that he was going to become a Shinigami to change things so that she would never have to cry again. He entered the Shinigami Academy and he graduated within a single year. As Hitsugaya is not the only white-haired prodigy within the Soul Society, Gin was immediately placed into the 5th Division under Aizen. One night, Aizen found Gin standing over the corpse of the division's 3rd seed. Rather than punish him, Aizen praised his efforts, and he covered up the murder and gave Gin the vacant position. Gin's infiltration was underway. What followed was 100 years of commitment to a disguise so thorough that it cost Gin everything that he was. He participated in the holification of the Vizards during the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, as he watched Shinji Hirako and the others be transformed into monsters. He stood beside Aizen, who was wearing a Reiatsu concealing cloak, as Aizen cut down Ishin during the Everything But the Rain flashback. Gin also played the part of the sadistic villain during the Soul Society arc, allowing Ichigo through the gate when he could have killed him, manipulating Hitsugaya, weaponizing Kira's loyalty, attempting to kill Momo as a distraction, psychologically tormenting Rukia on the bridge to her execution, as he did all of this knowing that Rangiku was watching, confused and hurt by everything that she saw. During the fake Karakura Town arc, he cut Hiyori in half with Shinzo without flinching, as he commented that's one down, while maintaining that signature grin on his face. There's something that Kubo revealed within the 13 Blades databook. During the interview section, he reframes all of this. He admitted that he actually had 2 ideas for Gin's character and hadn't decided between them until late in the writing process. One was the revenge angle. Gin did everything for Rangiku. The other was that Gin was simply evil, full stop. Kubo deliberately wrote every scene to work under either interpretation. The cruelty towards Kira, the sadism with Rukia, cutting Hiyori in half, all of it was designed to feel genuinely malicious if the evil ending was chosen by Kubo, or like the necessary cost of deep cover if the revenge ending was chosen. The chapter 178 apology, Gin telling Rangiku as he departed for Hueco Mundo that he wished that he could be held by her a little longer, ended up being the detail that tipped the scales towards Kubo picking revenge. But the fact that Kubo kept both options alive for so long is why Gin's villainy never felt performative. It was genuine. The final thing that Gin needed before making his move was to get Rangiku out of the way. This wasn't because she was a threat to Aizen, but because she was a threat to his plan. Rangiku arrived in the real Karakura town in the Soul Society despite barely being able to stand under Aizen's spiritual pressure. She confronted Gin directly. She demanded to know why he had followed Aizen, why the betrayal was worth it for him, why he had abandoned Kira who trusted him so completely. Gin's response cuts right to the center of their relationship. He asks her if she's serious, if it was really Kira's faith that was betrayed. The implication here is obvious. It wasn't Kira who trusted Gin the most and felt the sting of his departure the hardest. It was in fact Rangiku. She deflects as he sees through it immediately. Then Gin draws his blade on her and calls her a nuisance, because in this moment she is, not to Aizen, but to the assassination that Gin is about to attempt. If Rangiku is standing next to Aizen when Gin makes his attempt, she could get caught in the crossfire, or worse, Aizen could use her as leverage. She has to be removed from the equation entirely. So Gin casts Hakufuku, a Kido spell that renders a target unconscious as he masks their Reiatsu, and Rangiku drops to the ground. To any outside observer, and more importantly to Aizen's spiritual senses, she's as good as dead. Her energy signature vanishes completely, completely. This was the only way that Gin could save Rangiku and trick Aizen at the same time. Gin returns to Aizen's side and reports that he killed her. Aizen confirms that Rangiku's spiritual energy is no longer detectable, as he then expresses surprise, as he says he assumed Gin would have shown her mercy. Now this is Aizen intelligently probing. He knows about Gin's history with Rangiku, and he's testing whether if that emotional attachment has compromised his loyalty. Gin shuts it down completely, stating that he has nothing resembling feelings, and then he delivers the line that every Bleach fan remembers. He states, "I'm a snake, cold of flesh and devoid of heart. My tongue flicks back and forth, ever in search of new prey, and if I like what I find, I swallow 'em whole." This is Gin maintaining his cover for one final time, as he's distancing himself from any sentimentality that Aizen might exploit. Strip away what Gin is saying on the surface and look at the subtext. Gin is warning Aizen. He is telling him exactly what he is and exactly what he is about to do to him. A predator who's been watching his prey for 100 years, and the prey has just turned its back on him. Aizen draws his sword as he plans to go after Ichigo's friends. He casually states that he wants to kill them and hang their corpses somewhere visible, as he begins to create the Oken. In this moment, Aizen's completely in control. The Gotei 13 is broken, Isshin, Urahara, and Yoruichi are down. Nobody is left to really challenge him. And then Gin catches his blade, just casually reaches out and touches Kyoka Suigetsu. The complete hypnosis of Kyoka Suigetsu has a single weakness. If you physically touch the Zanbakudo while it's in its unreleased state, the hypnosis will not work on you. Nobody in the Gotei 13 knew this, not even Yamamoto, who fought Aizen directly moments ago, not even Urahara, who spent a century preparing countermeasures. Only Gin knew, and the craziest part is that Aizen told him voluntarily. When Gin was still a child serving under Aizen in the 5th Division, Aizen shared this information himself because he was that confident that it would never be used against him. Can't Be On World later confirms just how critical this weakness is. When Tokinada wields a copy of Kyoka Suigetsu through his Zanbakudo Enra Kyoten, Aura neutralizes it using the exact same method, touching the unsealed blade, the one trick that only Gin had been entrusted with. So Gin touches Kyoka Suigetsu, then from behind his billowing sleeves he fires Kamishini no Yari directly into Aizen's chest. The blade pierces him and retracts within the fraction of a second, leaving a fragment lodged inside of Aizen's heart. As Gin utters the command, "Kill Kamishini no Yari," Aizen's body starts to break apart as the upper right portion of his torso completely disintegrates. A gaping hole appears in his chest with the Hogyoku floating in the middle of the cavity. Gin snatches it and disappears around the side of a building. By every measure, Aizen should be dead here. What makes this truly staggering is that Aizen expected Gin's betrayal. He had known the entire time, and he kept Gin at his side specifically because of it. When Gin makes his move in chapter 414, Aizen doesn't react with shock. He tries to remain composed and reveals that he was always expecting Gin to turn on him. He was curious about how Gin would attempt it. That's the level of arrogance that Aizen has. He viewed Gin's 100-year assassination plot as a spectator sport. He kept a live blade at his own throat for a century because he wanted to see the show. He genuinely believed that no matter what Gin attempted, it just wouldn't work. And as frustrating as it is, Aizen wasn't wrong to think this, because under any other circumstances, keeping your would-be assassin close would be catastrophically stupid. But Aizen's confidence wasn't baseless, it was rooted in the Hogyoku. He had fused with a device that manifests the desires of its wielder. He had transcended the boundaries between a Shinigami and a Hollow, and he had reason to believe that he was untouchable. So yes, Aizen anticipated a betrayal would occur, but he did not know the exact method of it. And more importantly, he had no idea that Gin had been lying about his Bankai for the entire partnership. He didn't know about the cellular poison of his Bankai, and he had no idea that a fragment of the blade had been sitting inside of his heart for that fraction of a second. So in that gap between Aizen's emotional readiness and his physical vulnerability to what Gin was about to do, this is the exact window that Gin exploited, because Aizen was prepared for Gin to turn on him. But I don't think anything could have prepared him for what Kamishini no Yari actually does. Gin's plan failed because of a single variable that existed outside of the scope of anything that he could have prepared for, and this is the Hogyoku's autonomous will. In the series, we learn that the Hogyoku is something that manifests the heart's desire of its wielder. It ended up bonding with Aizen because it had chosen him. So when Gin turned that corner with the Hogyoku in his hand, he thought the job was done, but an eruption of Reiatsu shook Karakura Town as Aizen emerged in his chrysalis form and stated that it didn't matter whether if the Hogyoku was inside him or not, as it already belonged to him. The Hogyoku in Gin's hand began to glow. It disintegrated, phased through his grasp, and it reassembled itself inside the cross-shaped structure at the center of Aizen's chest. After the Hogyoku returned to its master, Aizen's body began to regenerate in real time, undoing everything that Gin had accomplished in a matter of seconds. It was already proven that Gin's Bankai could kill Aizen. We saw this the moment that his torso was disintegrating. I think against any opponent within Bleach, whether if they were a Captain Espada or a Quincy, Kamishini no Yari's true ability would have been devastatingly effective, but the Hogyoku was something that had never existed before in any of the three worlds. Its regenerative capacity, its will, and its loyalty to Aizen, these were phenomena that nobody understood. Gin's plan accounted for almost every variable within the known rules of spiritual combat within the three realms, but the Hogyoku exists outside of those rules. Aizen then proceeds to cut Gin across the chest in a final desperate lunge. Gin reaches out for the Hogyoku, but Aizen grabbed his wrist, ripping off his entire right arm and impaling him through the chest with his blade before throwing his body into a nearby building. And then Aizen had the nerve to thank him, claiming that the fear of annihilation was necessary for his next evolution, and that Gin's betrayal had elevated him to an existence that surpassed both Shinigami and Hollow. There's something people overlook about Gin's fight with Ichigo leading up to his assassination attempt on Aizen. On the surface, it looks like a straightforward villain encounter. Gin unleashes Buto and Buto Renjin. He batters Ichigo around, mocks his weakness, and he tells Ichigo that he's no warrior or a Shinigami or a Hollow, not even a person anymore. He asks if Ichigo honestly believes he can defeat Aizen when Isshin, Urahara, and Yoruichi already failed. He tells Ichigo to run away, that he's lost interest in him. But Gin wasn't trying to kill Ichigo here, he was trying to break him. Ichigo has this ability where he can read the hearts of those that he fights through the crossing of their blades. When they first clashed back in the Soul Society arc, Ichigo couldn't read anything from Gin because Gin wasn't looking at him. His gaze was fixed somewhere else entirely, and it was past Ichigo. It was towards a different target. Gin was never interested in Ichigo as an opponent, but he was interested in whether if Ichigo had the capacity to face Aizen, and when he found Ichigo paralyzed by fear and doubt during their Karakura Town encounter, he pushed harder. This wasn't to destroy him, but to force a reckoning. Gin had planned to kill Aizen himself, but he was smart enough to have a contingency in place. In his dying moments, Gin was able to see the beginnings of his backup plan. Rangiku found him first, screaming his name, holding him, weeping. As Gin faded, his thoughts went to her. He told himself he couldn't do it. He couldn't return what Aizen had stolen from her, but he was glad that he'd at least apologized. Then Dangai Ichigo appears on the battlefield. This all-new Ichigo is transformed with new resolve in his eyes, as Gin notes that his eyes no longer hold that same fear that he had seen before. They were now stern, fixated, and strong, as Gin felt something that he probably hadn't felt in a very long time. This was the sensation of relief. He could die knowing that someone else would finish what he had started. The Bleach Rebirth of Souls game gave us a final piece of Gin's story that the manga never really showed. After Aizen's defeat, Rangiku approached Yamamoto and asked permission to bury Gin within the Serete. Yamamoto refused. He told her that regardless of Gin's true intentions, his actions could only be classified as evil, and he would not be granted burial on Serete grounds. He could be buried anywhere else though. Rangiku then chose East Rukongai, the same impoverished region region where she and Gin first met as children. She brought only Kira with her and told nobody else the location. This was because the Soul Society of course still classified Gin as a traitor, and it was safer to keep his burial location hidden. When Gin was captain of Squad 3, he planted a persimmon tree inside the barracks and would personally make dried persimmons to share with others, the same food that he'd offered to Rangiku the day they met. The databooks confirmed that it was his favorite food since childhood. After Gin's death, when Rose took over as captain of Squad 3, his officer mentioned to Kira that the persimmon from the tree were ready. Kira walked over to it and said the existence of this tree is proof that you were once part of Squad 3, and Kubo confirmed in a databook that no captain in Squad 3's history fit the division better than Gin. The tree he planted is still standing, in a division that has now moved on under a new captain who never personally knew Gin in the captain role. Even if the majority of the Shinigami treat Gin as a traitor, it's nice to know that a memory of him still remains within the Serite. We've now reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What do you think about Gin's assassination attempt on Aizen? Could he have done anything differently, or was the Hogyoku always going to be an insurmountable obstacle for him? Some people do say, well, Gin should have just taken Aizen out before he fused with the Hogyoku. I'd love to know all of your thoughts about that as a possibility. Do you think Gin deserved a burial in the Serite, or were Yamamoto and the Central 46 right to deny this? Definitely continue the discussion in the comments, and lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this one, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.